Hello, and welcome to this week's Credible Live broadcast. As always, I'm here with our CEO and Chairman, Brian Fitzpatrick, and this week we are very excited to be joined by Trent Hancock. Trent is a cannabis business owner and grower with decades of experience in the cannabis industry. His company's horticulture technology has been featured in Grow Magazine and the Cannabis Grower's Handbook by Ed Rosenthal. He's here today to talk about cannabis lab testing. We're very excited to have you on the show today, Trent. To get us started, could you tell us a little bit about your background and the work that you do?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I originally started growing in Portland, Oregon in 1998. Medical had just passed at the time, and I went on to work in the first large commercial grows that happened in Montana. Their 2004 initiative that passed allowed unlimited cards, and you could sell to them. So it was the first businesses in the country. So I went around Montana helping people set up their grows, and realized really quick that in these large grows there was a lot of problems with bugs and mold, and so we were the first commercial growers to write an article calling for testing in medical cannabis, and warning about the side effects from pesticides, and that kind of got me into the whole testing discussion. This is 2013, and so I was really excited about testing when we moved from Montana to Oregon to back to Oregon to set up our recreational company. And then when, testing, we actually were dealing with the labs and everything, I realized that it was all basically a sham. I mean, to put it nicely, it's a total scam. And now, fake test scores run the market instead of high quality. So I'd like to get to where testing is assuring safety by the consumers and protecting the consumer, but where it isn't determining, who wins and loses in the market, So I guess it should determine who wins and who loses if it's being done properly. So
Right. Exactly. I think that's the key phrase. And, it's so crazy because, you and I have been talking I guess for a while, over probably about 18 months, almost 2 years since we met. And I really enjoy following you as an advocate in this industry, because you're advocating for safety and transparency. And we don't always see that from the grower side. We don't always see that from the producer side. And I think that speaks of not only your integrity, but the desire for the integrity in the industry. And, when we first started Qredible, people were asking, why are you doing this? And I said, because transparency and safety is critically important to consumer safety. And this is going to be an issue, and you're going to see a lot of headlines popping up. And lo and behold, here come the headlines. We're seeing lots of them. I mean, just with the LA Times, who's really been on top of this situation. They did a joint investigation, pardon the pun, with Weed Week. And that was, I think, back in June, I think it was. And it was really alarming. If you look at the results of that, they were doing a testing on pesticide contamination in legal cannabis products that are sold within California dispensaries. And I think the number was like, out of 42 legal cannabis products tested, 25 contained pesticide levels above state allowed limits. Now, that's like a 60% failure rate. And when you look at the contaminants they were finding, these were pretty serious things that were found in there. I'm terrible at pronouncing some of these, but myclobutanil, which is a fungicide, which is the most prevalent pesticide that was also detected in Maine's medical cannabis program. And they also found it in Canada. So, that's particularly concerning because it releases a cyanide gas when heated, which poses significant health risks. So, do you heat cannabis? Absolutely, if you're smoking it. And then there's chlorpenifer, which is, that's found in alarmingly high levels in that study in cannabis. And that's not permitted in any food products or is really not allowed at all. But it was discovered at over 2,000 times the base limit in some of these samples. And the last one, there was lots more, but the last one I'll talk about was pymetrozine, which that's an insecticide which is prohibited in the EU, Canada, and Norway. because of its reproductive toxicity and the carcinogens that are found in it. So that was at 762 times the reference levels in some of those cannabis samples. So, having said all that, and we're seeing this, by the way, pop up in Washington, Oregon, Maine, Nevada. We're seeing all these headlines: Michigan, New Mexico, Massachusetts, Maryland. I mean,
Yeah.
so in talking about that, I mean, Trent, what's going on out there? I mean, what is this problem? Why is this happening?
I got to give a shout out to Josh Swider. He's Infinite Analytics. His lab was one of the first people that I met that was, on the same path as we were on trying to expose it. Mine more from the grower side, his from the chemist side. But I had how I eventually got on LinkedIn. I'm not much of a social media person, but I got on LinkedIn because a chemist and a lawyer that I was talking to about New York's testing. So I was trying to get at least one state to fix the testing problems. And they were like, you need to get on LinkedIn because that's where the other chemists are. That's where the other cannabis people are.
Mm-hmm.
So I got on LinkedIn a couple years ago, right around when I met you. And I was saying, hey, testing's a total joke. As a grower, the first grower that came out saying we need testing, I can tell you this is not protecting the consumers. And so we started having all these labs following us, but not saying anything. And this is the first couple weeks of me being on LinkedIn. And then lo and behold, Josh comes out with an article in California talking about how he's finding pesticides all over the shelf and the testing fraud. I believe he took three labs in total between his lab and two others, and they all went into the same stores and bought product off the shelf. I believe it wasn't even legal at the time. He just did it because he knew it was fraudulent. And he started writing letters to the DCC about what he was finding, and some of these recalls they're having now, he had messaged them a year ago, giving them the batch numbers, telling them what he's finding in it. He's upped his pesticide testing. I think now he's up to around 600 pesticides that he can test for. And so he's finding all sorts of stuff and basically proving the stuff I was saying, years ago. I've been writing for 10 years on testing. And I said, when it came to Oregon, we started writing articles called The Fox Guarding the Hen House. It was one of the first articles we wrote out of Oregon. And basically, I was telling people they're finding out what the labs test for and then switching pesticides so they can spray daily and it still comes up perfectly clean. And even some of the labs are consulting them on this, saying, hey, if you spray this, you're going to get a compliancy clean test. And I think that's not right to the consumers to have us as the client to the lab, because it makes it where the lab is trying to appease us instead of appease the consumer. So I think that's really the root of a lot of the problem. But now that there's private labs all over the country, because it's structured like this in every state, you got to come up with a new regulation that doesn't harm the labs, that it still keeps those private labs in business, but breaking that business relationship between us and the labs, I feel, is critical. When we started seeing THC, I call it THC proliferation. People call it THC inflation, but I call it proliferation because one lab will give certain high scores to get all the business, and then another lab has to one-up them to get the business. And it's literally whoever's willing to commit the most fraud is the one that wins. At first I was upset with the labs because I was like, these are chemists. What are they doing? And then after talking to all of these labs, a lot of them put, all of their life savings into their equipment. And then when the regulations came out and they started testing, they realized either we're honest and we lose our business because all the cannabis companies are lab shopping, or we start cheating. And most people, sadly to say, they took the cheating route. And you'll hear stories of dozens and dozens of labs that have literally closed doors because they won't give people, inflated THC prices or THC scores, and they won't pass things that shouldn't pass. And but there's multiple angles of the problem, because it's not just the labs. We're in control of what we present the lab. So just a batch sticker,
meaning what the producers are actually shipping to the lab, right? What they're selecting and shipping.
The labs in most states, they come to our grows
right.
to product, but the batch sticker determines what they're sampling. So say, for example, I have a test score for batch 38, and I know this batch 38 is clean and tests high. Well, I can simply, if I need a test score for batch 40, I can simply call the lab, they come do the test, but I can put this batch 40 sticker in front of them instead of batch 38. So I can present them anything I want. And I started from consulting other grows. I started finding out what they were doing because I was helping people fix their spraying problems, and their growers would just be honest. Oh, we're presenting this and then, this and that. And I was like, this is not real testing, because if it would be the equivalent of a criminal controlling the crime lab's samples, if that makes sense. Like, it's, or another way to put it is, like, if you privatized OSHA and you had 10 OSHAs in a state and they had to compete for the business of the construction companies, and the construction company called them and told them what job site to go to at what time, you would have no OSHA bus ever again. And so, in my opinion, the best way to solve this is to get it where the labs are contracting through the state, but there's still very high volume testing like we have now, where you're testing every batch. But I believe compliance testing should be labs contracting directly through the state that don't have a business relationship with us. That's, my personal view of it anyway.
So you're saying labs contracting through the state. So basically, the labs are in business with the state, and the lab reports are being ordered through a central system through the state. And what about sort of the blind process there? I mean, what is your thinking about that?
I think there's a couple ways to do it, but metric already determines, when a harvest is done and when that harvest goes to retail. It's all tracked. So all you would need is a software program that would tie into metric, that when, say I have harvest lot 20, once harvest lot 20 starts going into dispensaries, that a software program will randomly decide what dispensary that is tested at and what lab is going to do the testing. So basically, like something you would see in a casino where it's just randomly moving, but it's saying, okay, you're going to have this lab go test this product at this dispensary. And then as a grower, I don't have control of, okay, like right now I can control what they test. And then when I send it to the dispensary, I know it's not getting tested again. And so I could send anything I want to the dispensary. But if you did it in a way where the software was determining it, you wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't know what dispensary they're going to take it off the shelf at. So in my personal opinion, as from the grower's perspective, that's the only way to get around a lot of these issues that are currently happening.
Well, that's interesting because you and I have talked about this, and we've designed a blockchain-based platform that does that kind of thing, but it's not being adopted, obviously, because it's not been yet accepted by various states. So, we are continuing to work and try to drive this process in that direction. And what's interesting, I think I told you this before, is this was the same problem in my previous industry that we had with residential home mortgages. Okay. Because there was a lot of collusion between the loan officer at the mortgage company and the appraiser. So if I needed Trent's home to come in at $500,000 appraisal for him to get that loan, wink, wink, nod, nod, I was calling my brother-in-law, Louis, and, dealing with him to make sure that appraisal came in above where it actually is. So when, of course, the entire industry blew up in 2008, the Home Value Code of Conduct was put in through Dodd-Frank, through federal legislation, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau actually governed this now, where you had to use that type of system. It was kind of a blind system, round robin. You had to go to approved appraisers, and you didn't know. You couldn't send it to cousin Louis if he wasn't approved, but it was constantly circulating through those approved appraisers. And that's sort of the process that we have built. But you made a statement earlier, and first of all, kudos to Josh for taking the high road and the integrity route. And you do feel bad for these labs where these people have put in their life savings, and And believe me, I've spent a career putting my life savings into, into companies. But at the end of the day, it's always about doing the right thing and getting this, getting this right. So talk a little bit about the fact that, we don't have a federal system for this. I mean, I always tell people, like, dealing in the cannabis industry in the US is like dealing with, 40 something different state or countries because everyone has their own idea. And, what are your thoughts about the standards themselves and what should be done about that, so we're not seeing this disparity in consumer safety and protection from one state to another?
It's interesting because my opinion on it is the lobbyists that wrote most of the regulations presented in the states were working for both labs and cannabis companies, and I believe that was a conflict of interest. So there needs a total overhaul, because at the end of the day, what the lab is going to want is very high volume testing. So when you go to the legislature, you're saying, hey, this all product needs to be tested before it ever gets to the shelf. This is consumer safety. And that's why the regulations are wrote the way they are, is because they convinced the legislatures that every single batch needs to be tested before it hits the shelf. And then you have the cannabis company that does not want liability if they fail a test. And so naturally, the answer to that is the cannabis company becomes the client, not the consumer. And I think that was intentional, my personal view. Obviously, I don't have any proof of this, so I'm not going to, say which specific lobbyist did what. But I do believe that the way it was wrote was in the best interest of both cannabis businesses and labs. Um, you know, it, I think that it can be fixed, but if you look at most of the major players want to remain cannabis businesses being the client. And
Hmm.
that's where I lose most of the people that do support me at the end of the day on fixing testing. Is as soon as you tell them you want the state regulators to be the client, which basically makes them working for the consumer, that's chilling to most cannabis companies that are spraying.
Yeah, and I think that there's a interesting thing. By the way, when you were talking about lobbyists, you had posted something on LinkedIn that made me laugh. It was what, people with no money have crappy lobbyists or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I love that. That just made me laugh.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, I was talking to somebody actually in Canada about, we're doing some work in Canada with a Cannabis Standards Alliance. And I was talking to somebody about that timing, about when this should really happen. And I brought up, sort of either validation testing from the actual shelf, right? Um, um, and while doing that sort of on a sampled basis, so you do your testing up front, but then you run a sampling, like a statistical sampling, algorithmic type sampling about what products you're going to pull from the shelf and do that. And the big pushback from some of the quality control people, and I could understand sort of their concerns about it, but their big pushback was, well, if you're doing it after the fact, now you're risking a recall.
See now, my personal view of this is, say I have $100 million cannabis company, I'm going to still do testing prior to the shelf if I know there's a risk that I'm going to get exposed for what I'm spraying. And so I believe compliance testing itself should be state regulated, contracting through with the private labs. But that wouldn't mean that there's not still labs that are not compliance labs that are going to test your product to make sure you're going to pass. If you know what you're spraying, for example, you can ask a lab that's not a compliance lab to test for it to make sure you're at allowable levels. And so, in my opinion, if you had compliance testing that breaks away from them, uh, you're still going to have cannabis companies testing prior to the shelf. If someone like myself that's never failed a test, I'm going to send my product constantly to the store, let them test the shelf because it's going to be clean. But someone that is spraying would still be paying for testing. It's just not compliance testing, because there's a big difference. To me, the term compliance testing is saying, hey, this is a test to make sure this is compliant and ready for the shelf. And you can only do that with a real third party. A lot of cannabis companies will tell you we have third party testing, but if you look at the lawsuits in California, which we helped get going just by introducing all the attorneys, the journalists, Weed Week, Alex Harpin, I got him into this, telling him, hey, test the shelf and you're going to find this, this, and this. Josh Swider helped with the LA Times stuff. But at the end of the day, I think that as long as I know that it's going to get tested, every batch is still going to get tested, but it's going to be tested on the shelf where I don't know where it's going to show up. That's going to make sure that I'm going to watch my P's and Q's, because it may make it to the shelf. But look at the recalls we're happening right now. Those recalls, most of them are a year after the fact that it hit the shelf. And under the method that I'm talking about, it would have been tested within a couple weeks of hitting the shelf. And you're going to have self-policing by the industry at that point, because they know that their entire brand is at risk of damage.
Yeah. And you know what, take the fact, that I'm an industry professional out of it and say, okay, I'm a consumer too, right? So I actually use product. It sort of pisses me off to think about the fact that I'm a consumer spending good money on this product and all this crap is going on behind the scenes. I mean, you posted something on LinkedIn, and you said you like the lab people who spoke, but if I had to be honest, it's the consumers in the room. I wanted to tell them that the COA really had no meaning, right? And because you're focused on the consumer, which is what we should all be focused on, right? And you were talking about spraying. I mean, there's some significant, bad things that can happen as a result for it. So talk a little bit about the consumer side of this problem, and what are the dangers to the consumer, and what should they really know about this? Because I don't think they know a whole lot about this, but now they're seeing the headlines, and that's going to create a problem for this industry.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess how I got into the consumer side of it is because I came from medical cannabis. So we were dealing with cancer patients. We're dealing with people with really serious health issues, immune system issues. And when I started consulting these big grows, I was watching them spray Avid all the way till cut down, and then handing this to cancer patients, and I at the time I was all about clean cannabis more for the connoisseur reason, because the people that taught me how to grow in the 90s basically explain that if you don't have if you're spraying your product with any kind of pesticide in flower, that it destroys the quality. It makes it harsh. It'll give you a sore throat, headache, all these different things. And so when we got into medical in Montana, the first business model, I started seeing these people spraying Avid and then handing it to these people with health issues. And I was like, this is totally out of control. Their own employees were medical card holders of them. And so I was seeing my own employees, because I was managing one of the big grows. Actually, it was the biggest grow in the country at the time. And when I first got in there to consult with them, everybody was having these rashes, sore throats, headaches, nausea. And then after we cleaned up the system and got it so they weren't spraying, most all of their side effects went away. And so I was writing articles about this and these side effects a decade ago. And that was before CHS, where people are claiming it's high THC causing the illnesses. But I've witnessed all the same illnesses that they claim on CHS happen to people smoking sprayed product. And so before even CHS, I was writing about these side effects happening in the cannabis industry. And then, going to Oregon and seeing how you were able to just switch pesticides, I realized that testing is a lot more complicated than what I knew, because I'm not a chemist. I didn't realize how hard it is to test for 600 pesticides, or how easy it is to find out what they don't test for and switch to that. And so as far as the industry goes, I think we should be testing for a lot more pesticides. Right now, 66 are in California. But, Josh is finding some of those recalls where they are recalling it from one pesticide actually had 20 pesticides in it, but the state could only pick up that one pesticide. So they're recalling it from only the pesticide that their lab was able to pick up. But those exact same batch numbers tested under labs that are capable of testing more, we're finding far more pesticides in it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you go from state to state, some are 66, 54, 72. It's all
Yep.
over,
Yeah.
it's all over the place.
Yeah. Yep.
Crazy. And one of the things you mentioned, which is you're seeing these side effects. We have absolutely no idea what the long-term effects are going to be of this if we don't fix it. And that's a problem because, I mean, we could be looking at neurological damage, because what you're looking at is chronic exposure to certain pesticides,
Yep.
cancer risk, reproductive harm, I mean, respiratory issues, liver damage, immune system effects, all this cumulative toxicity,
Yep.
which is what it creates, is going to, create problems. And then there's just the unknown interactions of that we don't know yet, right? So if we're not testing for this stuff and we're not putting these standards in safety, and people are saying, well, nobody's really dying right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But people don't realize we're in this industry that is booming. It's growing. It's continuing to grow. And more people that were on the sidelines that never touched the stuff. I mean, I'm a perfect example. Never touched the stuff growing up ever. Right. And now I've used it to replace certain, medicines, right? Pharma. Right. So I take a gummy and, I don't smoke it, but I take it in other forms. Who knows? I mean, who absolutely knows what we're going to be dealing with, and who are those brands that are doing it right, growing it right, doing it right? We just don't know because of these issues. And I think, just as we saw in the mortgage industry, I mean, nobody really died from a bad mortgage, but when you look at what happened, what caused this implosion in 2008, it was just this systematic issues and failures going on and on uncorrected. And here people can get sick, people can die. This is a huge issue that just builds upon itself if it's not corrected. And I just don't understand why we can't, why the government, even the state governments, can't see this as an issue. I guess it's the lobbyists. Is that it?
I hate to say it, but I think it is a huge part of it. I think when you're running a big company that is already spraying and you don't know how to fix it, you don't want the pesticide test to all of a sudden be 300 pesticides instead of 66, because then you're going to have to figure out, okay, well, what can I spray now? And, back when I was younger in the cannabis industry, people were consuming the very crops they were selling because they were very small crops. And so you had that kind of check and balance on them, because if you're going to spray some nasty stuff on your product, you're going to smoke it too. And I feel like it's gotten such large scale now that a lot of the investors they're not consuming what they're spraying, and their concerns are not, their concern is passing testing, because if you fail a test, you're gonna have to destroy $1 million worth of product or something. It's just a risk you're not willing to give as an investor a lot of the time. And I think there's a lot of really great investors too, if you get the right investor that understands these things. But the reality of the situation is everybody wants a return on their investment. And when I got into building systems that you don't need to spray pesticides, that it was strictly over as a connoisseur, being able to smoke something that tastes amazing, that's smooth, that you could smoke all day and never get a sore throat. Those are the kind of things that as a connoisseur you want. But then when I got into the medical side, I realized this isn't just about being a connoisseur. This is these people's health. And like you're saying, we don't know what's going to happen next. Like Josh was talking about, he's got kids. And what happens when his kids are old enough to start going in these dispensaries and buying this stuff? I mean, he takes it serious because somebody's kids are going in, not kids, but people 21, still a kid. I'm 43, like it's a kid, going in there consuming that stuff that maybe by the time they're 27, 28 years old, they got a serious neurological problem. And the problems as far as cultivation, the larger the grow, the more you have to spray and the harder it is to control bugs and mold. So it's one of those things is, as the industry scales up, these large grows are having problems and they don't know how to resolve them.
Well, we know it can be done because you've been growing since 1998 and you haven't had these issues. You've learned how to grow properly without these things, and your product's testing well. So whose responsibility is it to fix this and to make these changes? Is it the states?
I think the state created the problem by creating the business relationship between us and the labs. You look at a lot of industries, that's a lot of how lab testing works, where the fox is guarding the hen house. And so a lot of people say we need to mimic pharmaceuticals or we need to mimic food. And I don't feel that same way. I feel like we need to create testing standards that are above and beyond those, and maybe we can influence food later where there's random grocery store shelf testing, but these big food corporations, they don't want their product being pulled off the shelf and tested there too. So you run into that same thing with food. They want to say, okay, no, the lab works for us, we'll get our little approvals and certifications and then send it on to the store. But we're finding more and more enormous amounts of pesticides in our food. That's a whole nother topic, but that's why we need to copy food. I disagree. I think America is the wealthiest country on earth, and we're also have the lowest health. We get cancer faster than everybody. We have serious issues on our food supply that need addressed. So I don't necessarily want to copy that in cannabis.
Well, I'll tell you what, anybody who wants to talk to you and get in touch with you about, how to grow properly, I assume that you're helping people do that. You got your own things going on. How would somebody get in touch with you?
Well, they could give me a call. They could get on LinkedIn and message me on LinkedIn. We're developing, because we developed air systems to prevent bugs and mold, and then we've only been using it for our systems mainly, and close friends that I build grows out for. But we're taking this tech to market for other growers soon. So it's one of those things where I can give you advice if you're a company that's spraying and trying to figure out. I can help somebody to an extent as far as telling them the principles they need to grow by to prevent it. A lot of it is interfering in the reproductive rate of the bugs and of spores, which is done with fresh air. Most companies seal their rooms up and inject CO2. But what they don't realize is we were injecting CO2 in the 90s to hide our grows. The reason why you'd have to inject CO2 is because you could not exhaust your air out and replace it. If you did, the smell would go outside and you could either get arrested or robbed, So people walk by your house and they smell cannabis and you're a target at that point. And so the original reason why people were sealing their rooms and injecting but then when Colorado legalized, the big investment money came in and they listened to consultants. I call them snake oil consultants, but they went out and told them to seal these huge warehouses, don't let any air in or out. And that actually is the whole premises, in my opinion, of why the bugs and mold are happening, between that and having genetics with bad immune systems that can't resist bugs and mold.
Well, we can talk about this for hours. We're at the bottom of the hour now, and if you want to connect with Trent, please do on LinkedIn. Trent Hancock, thank you for joining us, and we need to have you back on because I think we still have a lot to talk about, and we need to continue following this issue, and we need to continue to drive consumer safety, trust, and transparency in this industry, because otherwise the industry is going to go the wrong direction and people are going to go back to the illegal side, the illicit side, and consumers will lose trust if the headlines continue. And if we don't change things, the headlines continue. Thanks for doing all that you're doing. And thanks for Josh Schweiter as well for stepping up with integrity and doing what he's doing as well. So join us again. I think next week we might have an off week, but we're still waiting to name our guest for next week. But who knows? We might want to have you back.
Quick, so yeah, we definitely have a lot more we can cover, and I appreciate you, trying to figure out answers for these issues.
Well, absolutely. So thanks everybody, and join us again next week.